Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everybody, I should say. What a start, huh? To the Secretary of State's Notary Public Town Hall about remote notarization. Uh, you'll hear me refer to it as remote notarial acts somewhere along the way, I'm sure. So, same thing that we're talking about here. Um, Director of the Charities and Legal Services Division, the division of the Secretary of State's office where notary applications go, and where many of you reach out for questions and answers along the way. We're going to talk in more detail about remote notarizations. Before we get started, a few matters of housekeeping. Please, if you haven't already, mute yourself, mute that mic so there's no background or feedback so everybody can hear what's being discussed. Turn your camera on. That's great. Love to see those faces, but don't have to do that either if you don't want to. If you have questions along the way, there is a chat box feature. You can throw it into the chat. Ask that question. Please do not answer your question or other people's questions. We'll have notary officers on hand to answer those questions. Every now and then we get a well-intentioned person that'll try to answer somebody else's question and they give the wrong answer. Let that notary officer answer the question that you see in the chat box. Please feel free to use it to ask questions, but do not use it to answer other people's questions. This town hall is recorded. And by joining this town hall, you are consenting to participate in that recording. And so be aware of that. This recording will also be posted on our website later on today. Or not later on today, later on this week, I should say. I don't want to set too high of that expectation. So this town hall will be posted online, and you'll be able to see that recording at a future point in time. It'll be posted on the main notary page of the Secretary of State's website. If you take nothing else from this town hall today, please take the following. If you got questions, ask us at the Secretary of State's office. If you're looking for some basic information about how to renew or how to apply or how to become a remote notary, go to our website, SOS, like Secretary of State. So it's sos.maryland.gov. Maryland is spelled out, .gov. So sos.maryland.gov, and click on the notaries page, and you'll find all kinds of helpful information there, or information at least that I hope is helpful to you there. So be sure to check that out, sos.maryland.gov, and go to the notary page from there. So you'll find lots of information there, and we'll have contact information up at the end for our notary division as well. Should you have any questions after the fact, think about it later, whatever it may be, or just don't ask in front of other people towards the end. That's totally fine. We'll throw that contact information out there. And again, this town hall is for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be legal advice. So with that in mind, a special guest today, Deputy Secretary of State Michael Lorey. Michael, if you want to say a few words. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome. Thank you, Mike. I'll let him take the lead on this town hall. He does an excellent job and is a wealth of knowledge, and to the whole team. I know they get thousands of emails every month, and they don't just reply to your questions, but they put the serve in service. And I know you all are public servants as well. So thank you for what you do. This is important work on behalf of the state to make sure these documents are notarized and official. It's what Governor Moore likes to say, service will save us. Service is sticky. So you're part of this operation as well. And thank you, Mike, and your team. Service with a smile as well. They're amazing public servants, and they're trying to make your role easier. And I know they get complicated questions, especially when we're dealing with new technology. But I think they answer everyone's question and in a very timely way. And again, with a smile. So we appreciate that. And for Secretary Lee and myself, Deputy Secretary Michael Lorey, we're just so proud to be in this role in the Moore-Miller administration. Again, to uplift what you're doing and to be here as a resource. So with that, I'll turn it over. I'm going to stick with you because I want to learn some insights myself. And we do appreciate you not just becoming notaries, but sticking with the courses, understanding some of these details. And remote notaries is also a way for you to earn a little extra money. So I think it's a great opportunity for everyone. So enjoy the town hall.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Thanks for joining us today. No pressure, right? Um, so just like we always do before we get going, just talk about sources of legal authority. And so the Maryland Constitution, being a notary public's actually found in the state's constitution. And also the notary law, Maryland Annotated Code, Title 18, subtitles 1 and 2 is where you find much of what we're going to talk about here today, which Annotated Code of Maryland is the state's laws. And also in the Code of Maryland Regulations, 01.02.08, 1 through, I need to update that, more than 1 through 12 now. But what you're really looking at is 1 through 12. The later stuff talks about course of study, provider requirements, and things of that nature. So, but this is really where we're going to find everything we're talking about today. So
I think you muted your mic.
Mike, you're muted.
We can't hear you.
I got you now. Thank you. I wonder how that happened. Somebody already, 2 minutes in, somebody already didn't like what I had to say, I guess. I don't know. Must be commissioned already as a notary public to become a remote notary. So if you're not currently commissioned, you cannot qualify to become a remote notary. You have to be currently commissioned. And so folks can apply or renew online. That's the link to your become a notary or to renew your commission right there. That's also your link if you wanted to submit your remote notary notification form online to us to become authorized to perform remote notarial acts. So any of those applications, we're just updating your information. It's going to be found through that link. And you just click on the appropriate image there on that page. It tells you what each one's for. But apply or renew or even become remote notaries, you're going to do through that link. And just as a quick reminder, notary publics, in order to qualify, you must meet these following things, right? 18 years or older, good moral character and integrity, resident of the state of Maryland, or have a place of employment or practice in the state. And if you're living in the state, you have to be a resident of a senatorial district from which you're appointed. So if everybody ever thought, oh, why don't I put my legislative district on there? That is why. And if you're not a resident of Maryland, you need to be a resident of a state that allows Maryland residents working in that state to serve as a notary public. For those thinking about renewing or maybe at an expiration date coming up here soon, you can renew up to 60 days prior to your expiration and within 30 days after the expiration of your current commission. So think about that. Now the folks will reach out. You talk to somebody the day that's renewing next year. It's okay. You got plenty of time. You can't renew till up to 60 days before you expire. And then those that haven't renewed in the last few years, you may not have encountered this last requirement yet, but if you are a new applicant, you have to complete a course of study and pass an examination. And if you're a renewing applicant, you have to sit through it and take that course of study. Lots changed in notary law in the last 4 years. A whole lot has changed. One of those things that's changed is the ability to remotely notarize documents, which we're going to talk about today. I guess the room also thinks I'm not here anymore, so the light went off. Things are going great today, right? So notification requirements. We're going to let you know, the notary is going to let us know that they want to perform remote notarial acts facilitated by communication technology. The notary is going to inform us of that. And if you're doing remote notarial acts on electronic records, you're going to let us know about which remote online notary vendor service or services you're going to use, and must submit that requisite notification to us prior to receiving authorization to perform remote notarial acts. When you complete the form, you're going to select, are you doing remote acts on electronic records? And that's where it'll prompt you to select RON vendors, or it's going to ask you to do remote notarial acts on tangible records, or both. You could do both. Two different types of remote notarial acts. So be aware of what you're checking, and you want to know what you're checking before you check it. You're going to also, as part of that online form, you're going to check all acknowledgments that you understand these things. So you're held to that when you remotely notarize. So make sure you understand what you're saying you understand. I know that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised, or maybe not. So just make sure you're reading those acknowledgments when you're deciding which type of remote notary acts you're going to perform. Nothing shall require any person to accept or agree to or conduct or complete a remote notarial act. You don't have to become a remote notary unless you want to. You don't have to become one at all. And even if you're a remote notary, somebody doesn't have to consent to doing something through a remote notarization. That person can do the traditional paper and pen notarial act all day long if they want. And so they don't have to consent to or agree to do something.
I think you're muted again, sir.
You muted again.
Oh, I keep getting muted. Thanks, everybody. So the authorization process, in order to become a remote notary, you're going to go to this page and you're going to fill out the remote notary notification form, and it's on that link again, same place where you would renew or apply. You're going to select one or more of the authorized remote online notary vendors if you're asking to do remote notarial acts on electronic records. We maintain that list and we update that list as new ones are added. So if you're trying to use a technology vendor for electronic record remote notarizations and they're not on that list, that probably means they're not authorized for use in Maryland, so you can't use them. Reach out and ask us if you're unsure, if you think somebody's supposed to be on that list and isn't. We can figure that out. If a form is correct and complete, confirmation email will be sent confirming you are authorized to perform remote notarial acts. So you're going to get a notification from us telling you you're good to go when you submit your remote notary notification form if it's complete. If the form is incomplete or you're trying to select an unauthorized RON vendor, you're going to be notified that it's not a complete form and asked to update it, and you can resubmit remote notary notification forms to correct errors on an original form submitted. One point of order here too on remote notarizations, and for those of you that do remote notarial acts on electronic records where you need to select a RON vendor or more than one RON vendor, if you change RON vendors, you need to tell us that. You just submit an updated remote notary notification form telling us of who your new RON vendors are. List everyone you're using every time you submit it. So you'll want to let us know of that. Here's a very important thing to note here. We get this every now and then, and it is very important to know that you must submit a new remote notary notification form upon each renewal of your commission. But wait until you have been sworn in for your next commission before doing that. So your authority to perform remote notarial acts expires with your notary commission. So if my notary commission expired today, I'm no longer allowed to do remote notarial acts as of today. When I renew and I go to the courthouse and I take my next oath of office to pick up my next notary commission, After I've done that, that's when I want to go put back in my remote notary notification form. If I expire 3 months from now and I plug in my renewal or 2 months from now and I plug in my renewal application today, and I haven't gone to the courthouse to get sworn in for my next commission, that remote notary notification form, if you were to submit it today, wouldn't do any good because you haven't been sworn in for your next commission yet. So when you renew, that remote notary commission or remote notary authorization expires, and you want to make sure you submit a new remote notary notification form, because if you don't, you're no longer a remote notary as of the time that commission expired. And again, make sure you submit it to us after you're sworn in for your next commission, so that your remote notary notification form applies to that next commission, not the one that just expired or is going to expire in short order. So be aware of that. Commission expires, your authorization as a remote notary also expires on that date for that commission. Make sure you let us know when you start your next commission that you're going to continue to remotely notarize. Notary authorized to perform remote notarial acts may cancel their authorization at any time by submitting written notification to the Secretary of State's office. That could be as simple as an email to the Notary Division's email address telling us that. So just like a regular commission, if you wanted to resign a regular notary commission, you just let us know of that in writing. And if you wanted to cancel your authorization to do remote notarial acts, do the same thing. You let us know in writing, and we'll note the system so that you no longer show up as a remote notary. So performing remote notarial acts, the Secretary of State may not authorize a notary to perform traditional or remote notarial acts if the person submits a notary application containing a substantial and material misstatement or omission of fact. So what's that mean? Just answer every question and be honest on those applications and the remote notary forms. So a notary also cannot represent that they can perform remote notarial acts if they are not authorized to do so. So make sure you're authorized to perform remote notarial acts before you tell people you can. If you're one of those people hit kind of by that last slide here that I just went back to, that maybe renewed and never told us that you're still a remote notary, or you still want to remotely notarize, get that remote notary notification form in ASAP. Got to be authorized to perform remote notarial acts. I'm pretty sure, I haven't looked at it a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that that's one of the acknowledgments you're checking when you do the remote notary notification form, that your remote notary authorization expires with your commission. So increased maximum fees permitted by regulation for an original and remote notarial act. Big change that's happened in the last couple of years. And we have changed the regulations to allow for a larger fee to be taken. So we'll talk about remote notarial act fee here shortly. The exception to remote notarizations that apply to wills and trust instruments has been repealed. So in other words, what that really means is you can remotely notarize wills and trust instruments now. There was a point in time where you could not remotely notarize those documents. Now you can. There's some information that changed regarding credential analysis and identity proofing for remote notarial acts. There's some stuff that passed in the last couple of years establishing requirements and procedures for remote notarial acts involving a tangible record. So remote notarizations was a huge change that took effect October 1st, 2020. And then that was for electronic records only, though. Now you can remotely notarize tangible records under certain circumstances, which we'll talk about later. And so that became effective June 1st, 2022. Also, some changes that specified procedures by which a notary may administer an oath or affirmation to a remotely located individual, and authorizing the Secretary of State to adopt regulations prescribing methods for reasonable confirmation of a tangible record, and also some stuff that clarified what exactly communication technology requirements are applicable to remote notarizations. So just some changes. All this really remote notarizations at all, and subsequent changes in the last 4 years. So all kinds of changes made with effect to remote notarizations, and now not just remote notarizations on electronic records, but remote notarizations on tangible records as well. There's some regulation changes as well for remote notarial acts recently. Earlier this year, the fee for a remote notarial act went up to $30. It was $25, now it's $30. For your regular traditional notarial acts, pen and paper, it went up from $6 to $8. So these are the new fees for a regular notarial act and remote notarial act. We're not going to get into details about fees that you can charge. That's not the point of this town hall. There are a couple town halls that cover that. In particular, the second town hall for notaries of the year, which is posted on the notary page of our website if you want to learn more about what fees you can charge and what fees you're allowed to charge and how much you're allowed to charge for those different types of things. Take a peek at that town hall, read the handbook, check out the regulations, whatever it may be. But $30 for a remote notarial act. Also, some regulation changes about what's a remote online notary vendor, a RON vendor, that were put into place when remote notarial acts for tangible records became a thing. Same thing here for items 3 and 4 with the regulations. A lot of changes related to when the law changed to allow remote notarial acts on tangible records. So that's what those 2022 regulation changes were intended to do. Again, the one earlier this year, to allow you to charge up to $30 for a remote notarial act. Up to $30 for a remote notarial act. You can charge less if you wanted, but you can charge up to that amount, but not more. Authority of the notary has this slide in here. We probably saw this slide if you watch all these town halls from an earlier town hall this year that talks about where you can perform notarial acts. Notary public can be anywhere in the state of Maryland, anywhere. Regardless of where you're commissioned, you need to be physically present in Maryland when you're notarizing. Say, for instance, I'm commissioned in Baltimore City, but I am on vacation down in Ocean City. I can still notarize because I'm standing in Maryland, wherever it is. Or maybe I'm up in the mountains out there in Garrett County, Allegheny County on vacation. And I can still notarize because I'm standing in Maryland when I'm acting as a notary. Not authorized to notarize in other states as the Maryland notary. So if you're using your Maryland notary commission and your Maryland notary seal, can't be in DC, can't be in Virginia, Pennsylvania, wherever. You need to be standing in Maryland, physically present in Maryland at the time of the notarial act, even if you're doing a remote notarial act. Even if you're doing a remote notarial act, you, the notary, need to still be in Maryland. A notary can notarize documents from or for another state as long as the document's notarized in Maryland. So what does that mean? That means you, the notary, are standing in Maryland, because as we'll learn here a little later, it doesn't really matter if you're remotely notarizing where the other person's at. It matters where you're at because you have the authority to act in Maryland only, not elsewhere. So enough of all that. On to year 4, remote notarial acts. What is a remote notarial act? First of all, it's an act performed by a notary using certain communication technology for a remotely located individual. Remote notarial acts are also known as remote online notarial acts, remote notarizations, remote online notarizations. I'm sure there are more phrases and buzzwords used that I have not caught up to yet, but those are the most frequently referred to phrases that I know of. But remote notarial act, remote notarization are the two you're going to hear me say the most. And effective October 1st, you can remotely notarize electronic records if you meet certain criteria. The remote notarial acts at that time required a RON vendor. The approved technologies that we have listed on our website that you could select for doing remote notarial acts on electronic records. On June 1st, 2022, you were allowed to start doing remote notarial acts on tangible records. That's where the video conferencing technology is used, such as some of the ones referenced above, but obviously not limited to those referenced above. There were some temporary guidelines allowed in the early days of the COVID pandemic that were created, but all those ceased to exist on October 1st, 2020. Hopefully not, but if there's anybody that got authorization to remotely notarize under temporary guidance, that long lapsed. That lapsed October 1st, 2020, when the law took effect. So these are the big landmark changes on remote notarial acts. Like I said, for a few months there, and earlier in October, in 2020, before October 1st, there were some temporary guidelines in place that was really to get us across the line in the early days of the pandemic before the remote notarial acts allowed under the law went into effect on October 1st, 2020. So the two main types. We're going to talk first about remote notarial acts on electronic records. A lot more information on this stuff here. Again, effective October 1st, 2020. The remote notarization, a signer appears before the notary at the time of the notarization using audio-visual technology through one of those approved RON vendors that I've referenced. Signer signs document electronically. The notary notarizes the document electronically. Electronic record starts an electronic record, stays an electronic record through that notary process, right? It's electronic. It's not a sheet of paper in front of you. You can't put pen to do a special effect today. None of this, right? None of that for a remote notarial act on electronic records while you're notarizing. It's all on that screen, on that computer screen. So technology allows the notary to witness the signature being affixed by the signer and can affix their seal to the electronic record and complete the certificate, the notarial certificate wording on the electronic record. It's all happening in real time on our screens. We can see it happening, just like you could see a notarial act happening on that sheet of paper, right? I don't have a special effects budget. I just got a sheet of paper. So I don't want one either, by the way. So it's replacing the on-paper notarial act all in an electronic form in real time, happening at the same moment. I see you, you see me, I identify you, I watch you sign, you watch me fill out the certificate and affix my seal, all happening at the same time, but now it's happening electronically. And those RON vendors that we have authorized are the ones that have the technology that meet the requirements of the law. So one other term used, webcam notarization. Oftentimes because folks are doing it on a computer screen and you're using your webcam, just like we are now, to talk and communicate. Regardless of the nomenclature, the remote notarization requires signing, witnessing, and notarization to occur during that same transaction. So it's all happening at the same time, in real time. Contemporaneously is a word you've seen in the law and you've heard me use before, because it's in the law. And that's all happening here. The Remote Notarial Act it's all occurring contemporaneously. We're all here at the same time, at the same place, at the same occurrence, getting the document notarized and completing the Notarial Act. So validity of a Remote Notarial Act. So there was a point in time, again, I mentioned earlier, where you could not perform a remote notarial act on a will or a trust instrument. So at first, you could do remote notarial acts on electronic records for all but these two things. When the law changed in June of 2022, you were allowed to do a notarial act on a will or a trust instrument. It could be remotely notarized. A remote notarial act has the same validity under the law as a regular notarial act. Traditional on paper, pen and paper, remote notarial act. Same thing, still a remote notarial act. The notaries identified you, you were there, they were able to identify you, watch you sign, complete the act, affix their seal. So it's same validity as a traditional notarial act. And I mentioned earlier, the notary's got to be in Maryland, right? The notary has to be in Maryland, but the signer could be anywhere. Signer doesn't have to be located in Maryland. We're going to talk about some restrictions on remote notarial acts a little later on, but the signer could be anywhere. I could be on the International Space Station and see my Maryland notary and have them remotely notarize something for me if I can connect. It matters that the notary's in Maryland. So if I'm the notary, I still have to be here standing in the state of Maryland. But the signer could theoretically be anywhere in the world or universe, whatever. Obligations of remote online notary vendors. Just briefly here, the technology that's being used by you, the notary, to facilitate these notarial acts for the remotely located individuals. RON vendors have to offer something called identity proofing and credential analysis. We're going to talk about what that is for a little bit, or in a little bit, I should say. RON vendors are required to provide technology training to our remote online notaries that are authorized to perform remote notarial acts. One of their requirements is that they have to teach you how to use their technology to do a remote notarial act. You already know how to do a notarial act, right? You're just going to learn how to use their technology to do it remotely. Hopefully everybody knows how to notarize stuff. And so it's more about technology training to accomplish that end. Rather, they're not going to teach you how to be a notary. A notary does the same thing, whether you're in person doing a paper notarization or online doing a remote notarization. It's all the same job. It's just you're using a different technology rather than standing face to face to achieve that notarial act. Instruction prepares notaries to use the RON vendors technology and ensure compliance with the requirements of the law, and the technology offered by RON vendors shall include a process for identity proofing and credential analysis as it's described in the law. So I mentioned that a couple times there on this page. What is that? What is identity proofing and what is credential analysis? Identity proofing is a process or service by which a third party provides a notary with the means to verify the identity of a remotely located individual by reviewing personal information from public or private data sources. Think knowledge-based questions. Think knowledge-based questions. Credential analysis is the process or service that a third party provides that confirms the validity of an identification credential by review of public or private data sources. Think somebody's ever scanned your ID. You got your driver's license and got the barcode and all the stuff on it and scan it and verify you are who you are. So identity proofing, credential analysis, and it's going to be performed by a reputable third party who provided evidence to the notary of the ability to satisfy the requirements of the law. The details of the requirements for identity proofing and credential analysis are outlined in greater detail in the law. We're not going to get into all that detail. I don't want you to worry. I want you to worry about it, but not overly worry about it, because that RON vendor's technology should be providing the mechanisms for identity proofing and credential analysis to occur. They wouldn't be authorized if they did not do that. So their technology meets the requirements and can properly identity proof or credential analysis for somebody that's needing a notarial act. And RON vendors are discussed in greater detail in the Notary Handbook and some of their requirements and things that they must meet in order for their technology to gain approval for use in the state of Maryland. But if they are a RON vendor that's approved and on our list, then their identity proofing and credential analysis technology meets the requirements of the law. If anybody were to ever find out that that's not the case, let us know. But if they're on that list, then we're working on that understanding that they do meet those requirements. Identification requirements, remote notarial acts on electronic records. So you can perform a remote notarial act on electronic records if the notary is satisfactorily identified a signer. So just like in person, you need to identify them, right? One of the nice things about remote notarial acts is that technology is not just going to let you look at their ID and see it, but that ID is going to pass through credential analysis, and they're going to pass through identity proofing in order to further verify that they are who they say they are. Satisfactory identification of a person in remote notarial act includes the same ways you typically identify somebody. You could still identify somebody through personal knowledge or by credible witness, but most times you probably don't always know who you're notarizing for. And if you're doing it remotely and you don't have personal knowledge of their identification, you're going to be making them pass through credential analysis and identity proofing. The notary must reasonably confirm a record before the notary is the same in which the remotely located individual made a statement or executed a signature. Fancy way of saying you need to know that the thing they're signing is the same thing you're notarizing. Good thing about the RON vendor technology, it's all happening before you in real time. You're seeing it. So it's the same document that you're notarizing if you're doing a remote notarial acts on electronic records. It's all there in front of you, just as if it was a regular paper notarial act, which you'll hear referred to later as a remote notarial act on a tangible record is when we're remotely notarizing paper records. Audiovisual requirements of our remote notarial act. So a notary cannot know that making the statement or signing the record is prohibited by the foreign state in which the remotely located individual is located. Upon authorization to perform remote notarial acts, the notary or person acting on behalf and at the direction of the notary creates an audiovisual recording of the performance of the notarial act. So your RON vendor technology is going to create a recording for you. How that RON vendor allows you to access that recording may differ by RON vendor. Make sure you understand how that is. Make sure you understand if it's on their platform and you can get it later. Make sure you understand if it's something different, like they send it to you and you got to keep it. But either way, the RON vendor technology is recording that remote notarial act on an electronic record. Remotely located individual located outside the United States. So I mentioned earlier, you could be anywhere, really. The signer could be anywhere. The notary has to be in Maryland, but the signer could be anywhere. The remotely located individual, the record that you're notarizing must be filed with or relate to a matter subject to the jurisdiction of the United States or involve property located in the territorial jurisdiction of the United States or involve a transaction substantially connected with the United States. So I kind of said earlier, you could be on the ISS, you could be on the moon. It doesn't really matter, right? The notary needs to be in Maryland. The signer could be anywhere. But if that signer is anywhere and you're doing a remote notarial act, that record that you're notarizing must meet this requirement here. It must be related to a matter subject to the jurisdiction of this country or involve property located in the territorial jurisdiction of the United States or involve the transaction substantially connected with these United States. So that's the one thing that you need to be thinking about if you're remotely notarizing something for somebody. It's got to meet that requirement. Talked earlier about RON vendors and storage of audiovisual recordings. Audiovisual recordings created for remote notarial acts must be retained for a minimum of 10 years after that recording. 10 years. Know how your RON vendor
Still
handles your recordings. You are responsible for your recordings. Just like your journal must be kept now for 10 years, right? Journal's 10-year requirement now. You got to keep your journal entry for 10 years. If you're remotely notarizing, you also need to keep the recording of the remote notarial act that goes with that journal entry for 10 years. So must be maintained. A lot of words here on this page, but basically you need to have a way of keeping that stored safely and restrict unauthorized access. It should only be accessed by you, not people. And should a notary Their guardian, conservator, or agent of a notary, or personal representative of a deceased notary shall retain those recordings as well. Talks about a repository designated by or on behalf of the person required to retain the recordings. So can you engage in a third-party repository? Sure. By written contact, you can engage a third party to act as a repository for the required storage. Again, a lot of this is happening through your RON vendor, are keeping those recordings for you, and you have to be able to have access to them for 10 years. Again, how exactly they keep those recordings for you is between you and your RON vendor technology. Be sure you understand that when you're working with them. Third party under contract with the notary is deemed to be a repository approved by the Secretary of State. We don't have any other repositories approved. So if you have an agreement for that to happen, it's deemed to be approved. 10 years, folks, 10 years, not just journal entries, but also recordings for 10 years. Big take home on this page is that. Keep it safely, keep it in your possession. Needs to be accessible to you for the minimum of 10 years after that recording occurs. A few more things here about RON Acts on electronic records. Certificate of the Notarial Act must indicate that Notarial Act involved a remotely located individual and was performed using communication technology. There's some exact wording in the law, but that's the gist of it, right? So you're used to the notarial certificate wording, right? Sworn and subscribed before me, or acknowledged before me, or signed before me, or attested before me. So there needs to also be wording if you're remotely notarizing on electronic records. There needs to be wording that indicates that's happening on that notarial act. So the notary shall attach or logically associate your electronic signature and official stamp to the record by use of digital certificate complying with this X.509 standard or a similar industry standard technology. That's the standard that's set forth in the law. Nothing shall require, I mentioned this earlier, any person to accept, agree to, conduct, or complete a remote notarial act. A person that agrees to accept, agree to, conduct, or complete a remote notarial act may refuse to do so in another transaction. I may be okay with it today and decide I don't really like that and not want to do it another day. And that's fine. No one may require a notary to perform a remote notarial act with respect to an electronic record with a technology that the notary public has not selected. So flashback to when we were talking about remote notarial acts on electronic records and selecting authorized remote online notary vendors, the RON vendors. You can only use the ones that you've selected, and nobody can make you use a different RON vendor than the ones you've selected. Communication technology shall provide reasonable security measures to prevent unauthorized access to the live transmission of these audiovisual feeds or methods used to perform credential analysis or identity proofing, and electronic record that is subject to the Notarial Act. So again, RON vendor technology should prevent these things from occurring, but they're not supposed to be allowed to occur with those approved remote online notary vendor technologies for electronic record remote notarial acts. So, I mentioned earlier too, going back to this, no one can make you do it with technology that you have not selected. Make sure you've told us that you selected that technology. And again, if you're going to change technology or technologies that you're going to use, be sure to submit an updated remote notary notification form telling us of what remote online notary vendors you're using. Doesn't have to be every notarial act. That's not what I mean. Just saying that if you're performing remote notarial acts, make sure you're using it on a RON vendor or doing it on a RON vendor that you've told us you're using. So remote notarial acts on tangible records effective by law June 1st, 2022. It allows remotely located individual signing a tangible or hard copy document, that sheet of paper, right? This sheet of paper, using a wedding signature. So there's a way to remotely notarize these tangible records. Only allow, though, for an individual the notary can identify by personal knowledge or credible witness. If you don't know who I am, and you don't have a credible witness that could tell you who I am, and you need to look at my driver's license or other identification card to notarize for me, you cannot remotely notarize a tangible record. Only for people that you have personal knowledge of their identity or could get knowledge of their identity through a credible witness. Right? Very important. Very important to know that. You cannot identify them through personal knowledge, and I will give this one another time here just to drive the point home. Got to have personal knowledge of their identity to remotely notarize a tangible record. No ifs, ands, or buts. Personal knowledge, credible witness. Cannot identify somebody using their driver's license to do this. You need a RON vendor if you're going to identify them that way to remotely notarize. All right. Pausing for dramatic effect to let that sink in an extra second. Remote notarial acts on a tangible record. This type of remote notarial act causes a tangible record to be signed and notarized. The record must be a tangible record throughout that entire notarization process. Can't be converted into an electronic record during this process. Touch on that in a few more seconds. Your video conferencing technology or RON vendor technology may be used to accomplish a remote notarial act on a tangible record. The notary is responsible for recording a remote notarial act and maintaining that recording for 10 years. Notice it's said a little differently on this slide, so we're going to talk about this here for a few. If I remotely notarize something on a tangible record for someone else, when that person sends that thing to me for me to complete my part of the notarial act on, they need to send me the actual tangible record. They can't scan it and fax it to me or email it to me. It's got to be a tangible record. They sign it. They sign this declaration on it. We'll talk about that here in a sec too. And then they send it to me. Got to stay a tangible record. I can't get it, print it back out, turn it back into a tangible record. If I signed this sheet of paper and I send it to the notary, it's still, they got to notarize this sheet of paper, this one right here, not another one that they produced later. I can't make a copy of this and fax it to them or email it to them. I got to either deliver it to them or mail it to them. However you would transmit that sheet of paper to get to the notary to complete the notarial act. That's how it has to be done. After the notary notarizes it, hey, whatever that person does with it, that's on them, right? Can't control that. But it's got to be a tangible record throughout the process of the notarial act. Talking about the responsibility of the recording, right? We mentioned that you could use a RON vendor for this, or you could just use regular video conferencing technology like what we're using now to accomplish a remote notarial act on a tangible record. If you're using regular video conferencing technology, of course, you're not getting the benefits of the RON vendor technology, such as identity proofing and credential analysis. Hence why you need to have personal knowledge or identify them through a credible witness. Or you don't have the benefits of the technology to ensure what that ID they're showing you is really a valid ID and is who they say they are, right? So you need to have that personal knowledge or the credible witness to identify in this situation. And that's why you can use the video conferencing technology. The notary is responsible for the recording. If you're using this regular video conferencing technology, you need to hit the record button. And you need to keep that recording. And you need to maintain that recording for 10 years. A lot of times, if you're doing electronic act, remote notarial acts, or electronic record remote notarial acts, I should say, most times the RON vendor is keeping that for you. Like I said, where they have some mechanism or process in place for you to access that. If If you're using regular video conferencing technology for a remote notarial act on a tangible record, you got to remember to hit record. You got to put that somewhere that it's going to stay secure. And you need to be able to reproduce that should you ever have to for up to 10 years. So make sure you're aware of that. Folks think, great, remote notarial act tangible record, I could just notarize for anybody that gives me a sheet. There are rules to this, right? And the biggest one is you got to have personal knowledge of their identity or identify them through a credible third-party witness. One important point there too, credible third-party witness. You would have to have personal knowledge of their identity to do that, right? Because you couldn't identify them using an identification credential either on regular video conferencing technology. So if you don't have personal knowledge of the signer, you got to have personal knowledge of that third-party identifier, the third-party credible witness to identify the signer. So be aware of that. That's an important point to think about. Remote notarial acts on a tangible record. What's the process? So just going to go step by step here down this page. An individual appearing before a notary during an audio-visual recording, just like what we're doing now, signs that tangible record and a declaration. The required declaration is both found in the handbook and the law, or I should say found both in the handbook and the law. It's in there. The wording is in there. So if I'm appearing before a notary to have something remotely notarized on a tangible record, I know you, right? You know me through personal knowledge. I sign this sheet of paper and I write or have the declaration on there and I sign that. So on this recording that's occurring while I'm doing that, the notary administers the oath or affirmation or acknowledgement, if needed, to the individual that's appearing before the notary. Notary must take that oath or affirmation or acknowledgement as part of the required recording. So if I have a remote notarial act where it's saying acknowledged before me on this blank day, yada, 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 then I need to make sure that that person is acknowledging that that act constitutes, or that record and them signing it constitutes their act indeed. If it's an oath or affirmation, they're swearing to the truth of something. We're catching that on this recording. The individual that signed the record must then send the tangible record and declaration to the notary no later than 3 days after the notarial act was performed. It says send it to the notary no later than 3 days after the notarial act was performed. It doesn't say the notary has to have it. I know we get a question about that every time. The person signing the record must send it to the notary no later than 3 days after the notarial act was performed. And it says 3 days. It doesn't specify 3 business days. It just says 3. So 3 days. That's it. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it is. 3 days must be transmitted to the notary no later than 3 days after the notarial, or sent to the notary no later than 3 days after the act was performed. And then after the notary gets that tangible record, they receive that tangible record and it's signed, and there's a declaration on there and it's signed. The notary must do a couple of things. They must reasonably confirm that the tangible record received is the same tangible record from the audio-visual recording. So I need to look at what I have in my hands and compare it to my recording to make sure it's the same thing. Need to do that. Frequent question folks ask us is, well, how do I do that? Well, have the person hold up what they're signing, right, to the camera, and so that you can see it. Because if you don't see it, you don't know what you're actually going to be notarizing here before they send it to you. How can you confirm it's the same thing, right? And then execute the certificate that's required for the remote notarial act on that tangible record. And that required certificate is also found in the handbook and the law. But, you know, certificates, did an entire town hall earlier this year about different types of notarial acts and notarial certificates. If you want a lot more information about what is a notarial certificate or what's an affirmation, oath, or acknowledgement, take a look at that town hall, read the handbook, take a look at the law. spells out in pretty good detail there. But we did do a separate town hall about that. If you want to learn more about that subject, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. You could spend a lot of time on that if you wanted to. So you got to complete the notarial certificate on the tangible record, just like you would any other tangible record notarial act that happens in person. Got to complete the certificate. And the certificate's also got a reference that it was done using communication technology for a remotely located individual. Because they're still remotely located, even though it's a tangible record in this case instead of an electronic record. So that is the step-by-step process. So again, I'll keep it here on this page for a second. It's a lot of wording. Again, and this recording will get posted online. So if I end up moving a little too fast for you, give it a few days. This thing will pop up on the Notary page of our website, and you'll be able to take a peek at it again and catch anything you missed here. If you have a handbook that you've bought from us in the last couple of years, it's already in there. Take a peek at it again, and take a look at the process and again, declaration and notarial certificate wording and things of that nature. So, tangible record notarial act on a remote notarial act on a tangible record, different than electronic records. In electronic records, we're always using the RON vendor. Tangible record could be a RON vendor, could be regular communication technology. Either way, there's a recording. If it's in a remote notarial act on an electronic record, that RON vendor technology is doing that identification, proofing, identity proofing, and credential analysis. It's probably storing that recording, or at least giving you a mechanism by which you can obtain that and store that yourself. Remote notarial act on tangible record, unless you're using a RON vendor technology, you're the one that's storing that recording. You're the one that's got to keep it safe. Make sure you do that. Never know when you're going to need that. We talked our last town hall was about some of the common mistakes notaries make. One of them was not keeping a journal. You can throw not keeping the recording onto that pile of mistakes that folks make on the regular. It's your responsibility to know that, and that could spell issues if it's not stored properly and can't be shown to be stored properly or reproduced should it ever be needed. So 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, just like your journal, 10 years. Again, so this is a remote notarial act on a tangible record. It's a tangible record from the time you watch them sign it on the audiovisual recording to the time you affix your notary seal to the notary certificate wording on this tangible record. It's the same tangible record. It didn't start tangible, become electronic, go back to tangible, started tangible on that recording, finish tangible, and stay tangible in between when you complete the notarial act by doing the certificate. So, and always making a journal entry for this notarial act, just like any other one. And we talked a lot about journal entries as well on the second town hall of the year. So that covers everything. So there's a lot of information here. To the extent you want to explore more, check out that handbook. If you're looking at using a RON vendor, you'll learn a lot about the technology and how it helps you notarize something remotely when you sign up for one of their platforms and use their technology. A couple things we're going to get to here. We'll get to questions in a second. This is our contact information on here. The Notary Division phone number, email address. Best way to get answers to notary questions, email them or call them. dlnotary_sos@maryland.gov, dlnotary_sos@maryland.gov is that email address. 410-974-5520 is that phone number. Folks will sometimes ask us, preemptively getting ahead of some stuff. Haven't been watching the chat box, but folks will ask, yes, we know there's a cost to using those RON vendors. There is a cost to using that technology. It's different by RON vendor. Every RON vendor has their own platform, the way they price that platform and your usage of it. Might be a subscription fee, might be a per transaction fee. Might be a base fee plus transaction, whatever it is. That's between the RON vendor and you, and that's for you to decide. I didn't post the RON vendor list on this recording for a couple of reasons. The biggest reason is it does change. RON vendors get added to the list. A RON vendor could get taken off of the list if we were found the technology wasn't meeting the requirements of the law. So it does come and go. But where can you find it? sos.maryland.gov, sos.maryland.gov. Click on the notary page. It's one of the first links on that page is the list of authorized remote online notary vendor technologies. And it's in that section of stuff related to remote notarial acts. You'll see stuff about the handbook and renewing and approved course of study and education providers. And then you'll see stuff about being a remote notary. And one of those things you'll see is the list of authorized RON vendors. I always tell folks, I tell folks this in a few different scenarios, but when you're signing up to use a RON vendor, you're signing up to use their technology that they develop. Some of them have developed technology specific to real estate, may not suit your needs. So it's up to you to find a RON vendor that would suit those needs. Though we don't actually break that out for everybody, but make sure you're selecting a RON vendor that meets your needs. So before you go paying and agreeing to subscribe or whatever it is that their fee schedule is, make sure you know what you're using. Tell folks, treat it like any other purchase, right? If you go to the store to buy a new refrigerator, you don't necessarily buy the first thing you see. You read a little tag and how big is it? Does it fit into the right space in my kitchen? Does it have, is it a top bottom drawer or side to side door? Which one do I, right? Same thing with RON vendor technology. Same thing with the RON vendor technology. What is it designed to do? Does that fit your needs? What's the price model? Does that fit your needs? There's a lot of RON vendors out there in that list. It hasn't grown as quickly as it did at first, but it continues to grow every several months. A new one seems to get added. So that list does change. And I'm going to keep this contact information up here for a little bit before we get into questions and answers. But just in concluding here today, before we get into the Q&A, first, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your interest in this. Thanks for wanting to learn a little more. And the recording is going to be posted on our website, sos.maryland.gov. Go to the notary page, usually within a week or so. And again, the town hall here was for informational purposes only. It's not intended to be legal advice. And so you can re-access this recording later at your convenience, as well as the other recordings we've had. Talked about top 10 mistakes notaries make. We talked about notarial certificates and types of notarial acts. In the second town hall of the year, we talked about the notary seal and journal requirements and how much a notary can charge. In the first town hall of the year, we talked about the notary new and renewal application process in greater detail. So there's a lot of information there. We had some other ones from prior years that are maybe of interest to you as well. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for wanting to hear and wanting to do it right. And I mentioned earlier a couple of things. If you take anything away from this, ask us questions if you have them. All right, ask us questions, and we'll try to answer them as best as we can, or get you to where we can answer those questions as best as we can. And so we're gonna stop recording here. Thanks for joining us, and then we're gonna just move into some questions. Thank you, everybody.